Don't bring cheap crafts into my house. We raised you better than that. That's what my mother said. Not in a whisper, not under her breath. She said it at full volume, at the Christmas dinner table, in front of every person in that room, while my 10-year-old daughter stood 3 feet away watching the mug she'd made with her own hands shatter on my mother's kitchen floor. Bryn didn't scream. She didn't cry right away. She just froze. Her fingers were still open, still shaped around the handle she'd been holding 2 seconds earlier. Her eyes went to the floor first, to the pieces scattered across the tile, and then they came up to mine. And the look on her face, I will carry that look for the rest of my life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I bent down, picked up the largest piece of that mug, the one with Bryn's handwriting still visible, the gold letters she'd painted herself that read, "World's Best Mom." And I set it on the table, gently, deliberately, right next to my mother's plate. Then I reached for Bryn's hand. She gave it to me without hesitation. Her fingers were trembling. My father sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on his plate, hands folded in his lap. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't confusion. It was permission. My brother Gavin leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed and a half smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say a word either. He didn't have to. His silence said the same thing it always said, that whatever happened to me was fine, as long as it wasn't happening to him. My mother smoothed the napkin on her lap and reached for her wine glass as if nothing had happened, as if a 10-year-old child hadn't just watched a grown woman destroy something she'd spent 2 weeks making, as if the shards on the floor weren't still there. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the very people you held up, hit that like button and subscribe. That was the last Christmas I spent in that house, but to understand why that moment finally broke something inside me, something that had been bending for 12 years, I need to take you back to where this started. I was 26 years old when my father's contracting business went under. Dennis Colby had run a small residential operation in Colorado Springs for most of my childhood, framing, decks, remodels. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, until it didn't. The contracts dried up. The truck needed a transmission, and 2 clients disputed their invoices within the same quarter. He closed the business on a Tuesday and didn't tell anyone until Thursday. By then, the mortgage was already 60 days late. I had just opened Cornerstone Physical Therapy, my clinic. My name on the lease, my license on the wall, my reputation on the line with every single patient who walked through that door. I was 26, solo, no business partner, no safety net, building a referral network, 1 orthopedic practice at a time. I had 6 practices sending me patients. My primary referral source was Dr. Howard Mitchell, an orthopedic surgeon who trusted my work because I'd earned that trust with results, not promises. By year 3, Cornerstone was generating $410,000 annually. I built that, alone. But the week my father's business failed, my mother called. Not to ask how the clinic was going, not to congratulate me on the referral I'd just secured. She called because the mortgage was $2,100 a month and they couldn't cover it. I didn't hesitate. I set up an automatic transfer that same evening. $2,100 the 15th of every month pulled directly from my account into theirs. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was simply what family did. That transfer ran for 12 years. It never missed, not once. 2 years after the mortgage started, Gavin lost his job at a logistics company. He was 23. He had no savings, no health insurance, and no plan. My mother called again. Same tone, same expectation. So I added Gavin to a health insurance plan at my own cost. $340 a month. $2,100 for the mortgage. $340 for Gavin's insurance. That's $2,440 every single month for 12 years. 144 months without a gap. $51,360. That's the number. Over 12 years, I gave my family $351,360. And not once, not at a single dinner, not in a single phone call, not on a single holiday, did either of my parents say thank you. Gavin certainly didn't. 2 summers before that Christmas dinner at a family barbecue in my parents' backyard, Gavin was standing by the grill with a beer in his hand when someone, a neighbor, I think, mentioned something about the mortgage. Gavin didn't flinch. He shrugged and said it was barely noticeable for someone doing that well. He said it the way you'd describe a streaming subscription. Automatic, forgettable, barely worth mentioning. I was standing 6 feet away. He knew I could hear him. He said it anyway. I swallowed it. I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded. I told myself it was just how Gavin was. casual about things that weren't his to be casual about. I pushed it down and went inside to help Bryn with her plate. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. I gave. They took. I stayed quiet. They never noticed. Gavin never held a job for longer than 14 months at a stretch. He bounced between warehouse work and delivery routes, and once spent 5 months selling gym memberships before that fell apart too. Every gap between jobs meant another stretch, where that $340 insurance premium was the only thing standing between him and a medical bill he couldn't pay. He never acknowledged it. He never offered to take it over. He treated it the way he treated everything I provided, like weather, like it just happened. My parents were the same. Dennis never once mentioned the mortgage transfer. Not when it started, not 5 years in, not 10 years in. Patrice mentioned it exactly once, at Thanksgiving, and only to tell me I'd scheduled the transfer on the wrong date and it had caused a timing issue with their auto pay for the electric bill. That was the closest I ever got to a conversation about $302,400 in mortgage payments. Meanwhile, Gavin was the son they talked about. Gavin was the one whose job updates got airtime at dinner. Gavin was the one whose name came up when neighbors asked how the kids were doing. When Patrice described her children to people at church, she talked about Gavin's potential. She never mentioned my clinic. She never mentioned Cornerstone. She never mentioned the $410,000 in annual revenue or the 6 orthopedic practices that trusted me with their patients. I was the one who paid. Gavin was the one who mattered. And Bryn existed in the margins. She was polite at family dinners. She helped clear plates. She drew pictures for her grandparents and brought them to every holiday. She tried. She tried so hard to matter to people who had already decided she didn't. That Christmas, Bryn had spent 2 weeks in our kitchen working on that mug. She'd found the blank ceramic at a craft store. She painted it by hand, bright yellow, with small blue flowers along the rim, and "World's Best Mom" in gold letters across the front. She wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a gift bag she decorated herself. She carried it into my parents' house like it was made of glass. When she set it on the table, her face was wide open. She was proud. She was nervous. She was 10 years old and she wanted her grandmother to see what she'd made. Patrice didn't even look at it for more than a second. She reached across, caught the edge of the mug with the back of her hand, and swept it off the table. It hit the tile floor and broke into 5 pieces. The handle separated clean. The gold letters cracked right down the middle. "Don't bring cheap crafts into my house. We raised you better than that." She said it to me, but she was looking at Bryn when she said it. Bryn's chin dropped. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes filled, and she reached for my sleeve, her small fingers twisting the fabric until it went white under her knuckles. She didn't make a sound. She just held on. Gavin picked up his fork and kept eating. Dennis cleared his throat, that same throat clearing he'd used for 30 years. But nobody even glanced his way. Patrice lifted her wine glass and took a sip. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the pieces on the floor. I looked at the table full of people who had taken $351,360 from me over 12 years and couldn't find the decency to let a 10-year-old girl give her mother a mug. I picked up the largest shard. I set it on the table. I took Bryn's hand. We drove home in silence. Bryn cried in the passenger seat for 11 minutes. I counted. I counted because I couldn't let myself cry while I was driving, so I counted instead. When we pulled into the driveway, she wiped her face with her sleeve and said, in a voice so small it cracked right down the middle, "What did I ever do to them?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't have one because there wasn't one. I carried the pieces of that mug home in my purse. I set them on the kitchen counter after Bryn went to bed. I stood there in the dark, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I looked at the 5 broken pieces of something my daughter had made with her hands, and her hope and her whole heart. I told myself I'd figure it out. I told myself I'd find a way to make it right. I told myself what I'd been telling myself for 12 years, that silence was the price of keeping the peace. 3 weeks later, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, an email arrived from the bank. The subject line stopped me cold. Application status, denied. The $185,000 expansion loan, 14 months of planning, new treatment rooms, updated equipment, space for 2 additional therapists. I'd walked the contractor through the blueprints twice. I'd already spoken to Dr. Mitchell about the increased patient capacity. Denied. The reason listed was insufficient creditworthiness, which made no sense. My clinic generated $410,000 a year. My accounts were clean. My payment history was spotless. I pulled my credit report that same night. Sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and the house dark around me, Bryn asleep down the hall. 3 accounts I had never opened, 3 credit cards I had never applied for, all 3 maxed out. $18,200 in electronics, $22,700 in resort stays and travel, $22,500 in tuadil, a down payment on a truck. His truck. Total, $63,400. The applications had been submitted using my social security number, my name, my date of birth. The mailing address on all 3 accounts was Gavin's apartment. I sat there in the dark. The screen glowed against my face. The house was silent, and that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a bone finally giving way after 12 years of pressure. I was done pretending this was okay. I didn't call Gavin. I didn't call my parents. I didn't pace the kitchen or pour a glass of wine or sit on the floor and fall apart. I closed the credit report, opened my email, and began typing. The message to Stuart Reed was 6 lines. I attached the full credit report, highlighted the 3 accounts, and wrote 1 sentence at the top. I need a fraud report filed by end of business tomorrow, and I need the mortgage transfer canceled today. I read it once. I read it twice. I pressed send at 12:03 a.m. Then I closed the laptop. The screen went dark. The kitchen was silent. The streetlight outside cut through the blinds and laid a thin stripe of white across the counter, right across the 5 broken pieces of Bryn's mug that I still hadn't moved. I sat there for another 11 minutes. I know because the clock on the microwave changed twice. I wasn't thinking about the $63,400. I wasn't thinking about the expansion loan or the credit score or the 14 months of planning that had just collapsed in a single email. I was thinking about Bryn's face at that dinner table, the way her fingers had shaped themselves around a handle that wasn't there anymore, the way her chin dropped before the tears came, the way she'd asked me in the driveway what she'd ever done to them. That was the reason. Not the money, not the fraud. Her face. I went to bed. I slept 4 hours. I woke before the alarm and checked my email. Stuart had responded at 6:14 a.m. 3 words. On it. Today. By 9 a.m., the automatic transfer was canceled. The same transfer that had pulled $2,100 from my account on the 15th of every month for 12 years. 144 consecutive payments, $302,400 in total, did not process. For the first time since I was 26 years old, that money stayed in my account. I felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, not satisfaction, just clarity. Like stepping out of a room I'd been locked in so long I'd forgotten there was a door. By 4:30 that afternoon, Stuart had filed the identity theft report with the Colorado Springs Police Department Fraud Unit. Simultaneously, he initiated formal disputes with all 3 credit bureaus and a civil fraud referral. 1 action, 1 filing. Everything else would follow from that single report. The investigation, the forensic review of the account applications, the device fingerprints, the mailing address confirmation, the paper trail that led to exactly 1 person. Gavin. Stuart called me that evening. Once Bryn was in her room reading. He kept it brief. The fraud unit had accepted the case. The 3 accounts had been flagged for investigation. He'd submitted the documentation, my credit report, the account opening records showing applications under my social security number, the mailing address on all 3 statements pointing to Gavin's apartment. The unit would confirm the device fingerprints on the online openings within their standard review period. His voice was calm, methodical, the same way he'd sounded every time he'd handled a contract issue or a lease amendment for Cornerstone over the past 8 years. The record is clean, Janessa. The trail is his. This isn't ambiguous. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat on the couch in the dark living room and listened to Bryn turning pages down the hall. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. 4 days passed before the first knock came. I was in the kitchen at 7:40 on a Saturday morning, pouring Bryn's cereal, when the doorbell rang. Not once. 3 times in succession, then a fist against the frame. I looked through the peephole. Gavin, shirt untucked, eyes red-rimmed, 3 days of stubble he hadn't bothered to clean up. He was shifting his weight from one foot to the other like the porch was too hot to stand on. I opened the door 6 inches. I kept my hand on the frame. I did not step aside. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was hoarse, pitched high in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught lying about a dented fender. I waited. The police called me yesterday. They're saying I opened credit cards in your name. They're talking about fraud charges. Fraud, Janessa. Do you understand what that means? I stayed quiet, letting him continue. You're destroying this family over a credit card. We're your blood. You don't do this to blood. His voice cracked on the last word. Not from grief, from the sudden, unfamiliar sensation of a consequence arriving on time. I kept my voice steady. You could have just called me, he said. We could have worked it out. I would have paid you back. With what? He didn't answer. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Where's your apology to Bryn? The question landed like a door slamming in a silent room. His eyes shifted. He looked past me, into the hallway, as if Bryn might be standing there. She wasn't. She was in her room, eating cereal and reading a book about horses, and she had no idea her uncle was on the porch looking like he'd been dragged through the last 4 days of his life. That's not what this is about, he stammered. It's exactly what this is about. He took a half step forward. I didn't move. My hand stayed on the frame. Janessa, please. If they file charges, I'm looking at... They said up to 24 months. You know what that means. You know what that does to me. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Call them back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the accounts. You can do that. You can fix this. No. Janessa, I said no. His knees didn't buckle. He didn't drop to the ground. But something behind his eyes collapsed. Some scaffolding he'd built his entire adult life on, the assumption that I would always absorb the cost, that I would always cover the gap, that the transfer would always clear, and the silence would always hold. He stepped back, his mouth pressed into a hard line. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. I just listened to the word hang in the air between us, thin and already fading. The door closed softly. No slam, just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. My phone rang 11 minutes later. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Dad. Declined without hesitation. A text arrived from Patrice, 4 paragraphs long, starting with, I hope you're proud of yourself, and ending with, you were always the sensitive one. I turned off the ringer. 3 hours later, Dennis called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. The voicemail was 40 seconds long. I could hear his breathing before he spoke. Heavy, deliberate, the same way he breathed when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. He said if I didn't withdraw the report, he'd file a complaint with the state licensing board, alleging billing irregularities at Cornerstone. I saved the voicemail. I forwarded it to Stuart Reed with no commentary. By Monday morning, Gavin had created a fake Yelp profile. 5 detailed 1-star reviews appeared on Cornerstone's page. Fictitious patient names, fictitious complaints, specific enough to sound credible if you didn't know better. He described treatments that didn't match any service Cornerstone had ever provided. He referenced equipment we didn't own. He posted all 5 within 72 hours of the fraud filing. That same week, Patrice called Dr. Howard Mitchell's office, my primary referral source, the orthopedic surgeon who had trusted my work for over a decade. She told whoever answered the phone that I was emotionally unstable and possibly over-medicating. She left her name, she left her number. She asked them to pass the message to the doctor directly. 3 attacks, coordinated, father, brother, mother. Each one aimed at the thing I'd built with my own hands over 12 years. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply forwarded every piece of evidence to Stuart Reed and let him do what I was paying him to do. Stuart contacted Yelp's legal department with documentation of the active identity theft case, the fraud filing, and the timeline showing the reviews appeared within days of the report. The reviews were removed within 10 days. He submitted Cornerstone's full compliance audit to the licensing board in response to Dennis's complaint. 12 years of clean records, every billing code documented, every patient file in order. The complaint was dismissed after a single administrative review. The clinic's record required no further inquiry. It required no defense. As for Dr. Mitchell, Patrice's phone call landed on a desk where 12 years of referral history, patient outcomes, and professional trust already lived. It went nowhere. I went through my phone that Sunday night after Bryn was asleep. I blocked every number. Gavin's cell, my parents' landline, Patrice's cell, Dennis's cell. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted every unread text without opening it. I removed them from my emergency contacts. I changed the code on the clinic's after-hours entrance. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. The house was dark except for the glow of my phone screen. I set it face down on the counter when I was finished and stood there in the silence. I looked at the 5 broken pieces of Bryn's mug, still sitting exactly where I'd left them 3 weeks earlier. I felt the first real peace I'd had in weeks. That was the last time I ever opened a door for a Colby who wasn't my daughter. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life. Not empty quiet. Not the kind of silence that fills a house when someone's holding their breath. This was different. This was the quiet that comes after you stop carrying something you didn't realize was crushing you. Bryn noticed it before I did. She came into the kitchen one Saturday morning, still in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, and stood in the doorway watching me make pancakes. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't calculating whether the 15th had passed, and whether the transfer had cleared, and whether Patrice would call about a timing issue with the electric bill. "You look different," Bryn said. "Different? How?" She tilted her head the way she does when she's deciding whether to say the real thing or the safe thing. She chose the real thing. "You're not watching the clock." She was right. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't watching the clock. I didn't seek updates on the Colbys. I didn't drive by the house. I didn't ask mutual acquaintances. But Colorado Springs is not a large city, and when a family collapses in a town where people know your name, the information arrives whether you want it or not. Month 1. The fraud investigation moved forward. The Colorado Springs Police Department fraud unit confirmed what Stuart Reed had already documented. Gavin's social security number on the applications as a secondary identifier, his apartment as the statement mailing address, his device fingerprints on all 3 online account openings. The trail was clean. The trail was his. The mortgage payment did not process on the 15th. For the first time in 144 months, the $2,100 did not appear. Dennis and Patrice were 60 days late within 8 weeks. Month 3. A woman I knew from the Chamber of Commerce mentioned at a networking lunch that she'd seen a foreclosure notice posted for a property on Ridgeline Drive. She didn't know it was my parents' address. She was just making conversation about the housing market. I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't react. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Month 5. The house, the same house where Patrice had swept a 10-year-old's handmade mug off the table without flinching. The same house where Dennis had sat in silence for 30 years, granting permission to cruelty with his stillness. The same house whose $2,100 monthly mortgage I had covered since I was 26 years old went into foreclosure. It sold for less than they owed. Dennis and Patrice moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex off Academy Boulevard. Shared laundry in the basement, a parking lot instead of a driveway, the kind of place where you hear your neighbors through the walls and the hallway smells like carpet cleaner that never quite works. I heard this from a woman at my dentist's office who recognized the Colby name on a lease application her property management company had processed. She said Patrice had listed Gavin as an emergency contact and left the income field blank. Month 6. Felony charges were filed against Gavin. Criminal identity theft under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 18-5-902. 3 counts, 1 for each card. The investigation had confirmed every element: his application submissions, his mailing address, his device fingerprints, the $63,400 in unauthorized charges laid out in a transaction log that read like a catalog of a man spending someone else's future without a second thought. The charges carried up to 24 months. Month 8. The restitution order came down. Full amount, $63,400. Every dollar documented, every dollar owed. Gavin called my cell from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. I deleted it without listening. By then, the background check had already started doing its work. Felony fraud charges, even pending ones, show up on employment screenings. Job applications went nowhere. The logistics companies didn't call back. The warehouse positions that had always been his safety net between failures now required background checks that returned a flag. He couldn't explain away with a shrug and a barely noticeable. I heard from Stuart Reed, not because I asked, but because the restitution order generated a notification to my file, that Gavin had taken a night shift stocking shelves at a grocery store on the south side of the city. $14.50 an hour. No benefits. The health insurance I'd carried for him at $340 a month for 10 years was gone, and there was nothing replacing it. The truck. The one with the $22,500 down payment charged to a credit card in my name was repossessed. I didn't know the details. I didn't need them. Dennis, at 68, started driving for a rideshare service. I learned this the way I learned everything else, through the ordinary channels of a small city where people talk. A colleague at a continuing education seminar mentioned she'd been picked up by an older man driving a 10-year-old sedan who said his name was Dennis and who spent the entire ride complaining about his daughter. She told me this casually, not knowing. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain. I thanked her for the ride recommendation and moved on. The licensing board complaint had been dismissed in a single review. Cornerstone's 12 years of clean record spoke without a single word from me. The Yelp reviews were gone. Dr. Mitchell's referrals continued uninterrupted. 12 years of trust is not undone by one phone call from a woman he'd never met. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was nothing to celebrate. A family had collapsed. The same family that had taken $351,360 from me over 12 years without a single expression of gratitude. The same family that had broken my daughter's handmade gift on a holiday table and called it cheap. The same family whose youngest son had stolen my identity and whose patriarch had threatened my livelihood and whose matriarch had tried to destroy my professional reputation with a single phone call. They did this. All of it. Every consequence flowed from choices they made. I simply stopped absorbing the cost. The credit bureaus completed their corrections 9 months after the filing. The 3 fraudulent accounts were removed from my report. My score rebuilt itself the way a bone heals after a clean break, slowly, then all at once. I reapplied for the expansion loan, $185,000, same bank, same loan officer. This time, the application was approved in 11 days. 14 months after the night I sat at that kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. and watched 3 accounts I'd never opened destroy my credit score. Cornerstone Physical Therapy held a ribbon cutting for its new wing, a Thursday morning in early June. Clear sky. The contractor had finished 2 days ahead of schedule, 2 new treatment rooms, updated equipment, space for 2 additional therapists. I stood in the doorway of the new wing and looked at the waiting room. Fresh paint, new chairs, light pouring in from windows that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. Bryn came in carrying something in both hands. She was careful with it, holding it low, close to her body, the way you carry something you've already broken once and repaired with your own hands. The mug. The same mug. She'd glued it back together, at home in the weeks after the door closed on Gavin. Every piece fit, but the cracks were still there. Hairline fractures running through the ceramic like a map of what had happened. She had filled each one with gold paint, tracing every break with a steady hand that hadn't trembled once. It was filled with wild flowers from our backyard, purple clover, yellow buttercups, a few stalks of something white and wispy that she'd picked that morning before we left the house. She walked to the reception desk and placed it in the center, right where every patient would see it when they walked through the door. She looked at the gold-filled cracks. She looked up at me. It's better now than it was before. I didn't disagree. None of the Colbys were there. Not Dennis, not Patrice, not Gavin. The room was full. Staff, colleagues, patients who'd heard about the expansion. Dr. Mitchell's office manager who brought a card signed by his entire team. People who showed up because they wanted to, not because blood obligated them. That evening, after the last guest left and the caterer packed up the trays and the new wing stood empty and clean and ready for its first patients, I locked the front door and walked to my car. Bryn was already in the passenger seat, legs tucked underneath her, reading the same horse book she'd been working through for a month. I started the engine. The low hum filled the silence. Mom? Yeah? I'm glad we don't have to pretend anymore. I looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't sad. She was calm. Settled, clear. Me too, sweetheart. I pulled out of the parking lot. The clinic grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The new wing visible from the road, the lights still on inside. The reception desk where a gold-cracked mug full of wildflowers sat waiting for tomorrow's first patient. Some doors close, so better ones can open. I never regretted a single second of it. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's protection. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Loyalty earns its place. And sometimes, the thing that breaks becomes the most extraordinary thing in the room, not because the cracks disappeared, but because someone loved it enough to fill them with gold. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.